Good evening, this is Shurmishta welcoming you to Reader's Retreat. Our story for today is A Mother's Heart, a story by Munshi Premchand. Munshi Premchand, born in 1880, he is considered one of the greatest fiction writers in Hindi. In a prolific career spanning 3 decades, Premchand wrote 14 novels, 2 plays, almost 300 short stories and several articles, reviews and editorials. Our story for today, A Mother's Heart by Munshi Premchand. The world was collapsing into darkness for Madhavi. None of her kin were around to assist her. There was no flicker of hope anywhere. She lived alone in that deprived house, and there was no one to wipe her tears. 22 years had passed since her husband's death. There was no wealth in the house. One can only wonder under what circumstances she had brought up her child, now that the young boy had been taken away from her. If he had died, she could have somehow consoled himself. One cannot hold a grudge against death. But this torture at the hands of those selfish people was unbearable. In a state of such great anguish, her heart grew uneasy, and she often thought of taking revenge upon the one responsible for inflicting this cruel blow on her straight away. There were only 2 choices left: kill the enemy or accept death. Both would have brought contentment. How good-looking and promising the boy was, the token of her late husband, the sole meaning of her existence, and the result of her lifelong struggle. Who knows what difficulties her son was going through, lying behind bars? And what was his crime? Nothing. The entire neighborhood was fond of him. The teachers of his school doted upon him. People close to him or otherwise loved him. There was never any complaint against him. Mothers like Madhavi would congratulate her for having such a son. He was a virtuous young boy with a generous and noble heart. He could himself sleep hungry, but would never spurn guests away rudely from his door. Did he deserve to go to jail? His only crime was that at times he would narrate the gloomy tales of his friends in misery to others, and that he would always be ready to offer support to those enduring oppression. Was this his crime? Is it a crime to serve people in distress? Is giving shelter to a guest a crime too? This young boy named Atmanand unfortunately had all those virtues that unlocked the doors of the jail. He was fearless, frank and forthright, brave, a patriot, selfless and diligent. There are precisely the qualities that are needed to put behind bars. These virtues open the gates of heaven for those who are free-thinking and those of hell for the subservient. Atmanand's social service, his public speeches, and his political writings had put him under the scrutiny of government officers. The entire police department from top to bottom remained vigilant, and watchful eyes followed him everywhere. Finally, a dreadful robbery in the district gave them the opportunity they had been waiting for. A search was carried out at Atmanand's house. Some letters and articles were found and seized, which the police tagged as substantial evidence for the robbery. A group of about 20 young men was noosed, and Atmanand was accused to be the leader of the gang. Witnesses were arranged. What could be cheaper to sell other than one's soul in these days of scarcity? What else is one left with to put on sale? It is easy to arrange potentially good witnesses with nominal enticements. Even the mean and worthless witnesses are turned into walks day with a little hand-holding by the police. So the witnesses were gathered and the case went on for a month. The case was nothing but a farce, of course, and all the so-called accused were sentenced. Atmanand received the hardest sentence, 8 years of rigorous imprisonment. Madhavi went to the court every day and observed the proceedings sitting in a corner. Till then, she had no idea about how weak, pitiless, and base human nature could be. When Atmanand's sentence was pronounced and he left the courtroom with the guards after saluting his mother, Madhavi fell unconscious. A few considerate people dropped her home in a carriage. From the moment she had regained consciousness, a stabbing pain rose in her heart every now and then. She had absolutely no patience. In her state of deep inner agony, she could see only one resolution to live for, and that was to take revenge against this persecution. Her son had been the sole substance of her life so far, but now she would nurture a new fixation, revenge from her enemies. She had no hope left in her life. She would consider her life fulfilled by avenging this victimization. She would make this luckless man-fiend Bakchi shed tears of blood too, the way he had done with her. The heart of a woman is tender, but only under favorable circumstances. The situation in which a man dominates others, a woman displays angelic charm and courtesy. But a woman nurtures no less disgust and fury than a man towards someone who has ruined everything for her. The only difference is that a man takes revenge with the use of weapons, whereas a woman employs craft. The nights grew wet with her tears, but Madhavi never wavered. Her agony dissolved into the promise of retribution to the extent that she grew oblivious of the rest of the world. All she could think of was how to accomplish this task. She had hardly ever stepped beyond the four walls of her house, having spent 22 years of her widowhood within. But now she must go out, she thought. In spite of her unwillingness, she would masquerade as a beggar or as a maidservant. She would tell lies and commit misdeeds. She would do whatsoever was needed to accomplish her revenge. The society had no place for munificence. Even God has perhaps turned away from humanity, having lost all hope. That is why such oppression took place here, and the villains went unpunished. Now she would punish the guilty with her own hands. It was evening. Some friends had gathered for a get-together in a well-decorated bungalow in the city of Lucknow. Song and dance were going on. Fireworks were lying on one side. Food items were being picked up from the tables in another room. There were police officers all around. It was the bungalow of Mr. Bakchi, the superintendent of police. He had won an important case a few days ago. The officers were impressed and he was promoted. This get-together was to celebrate the same. Such celebrations were often held here. Musicians were available at no cost. The fireworks went for free. The fruits, the dry fruits and the sweets would be brought from the market at half the price, and thus instantly a banquet would be set. Where others spent 100 rupees, these people could manage with just 10. Several guards were available for running all kinds of errands. And what was the important case that he had won? It was the same in which the innocent young man were thrown into the jail through fabricated witnesses. At the end of the concert, people sat down for dinner. Unpaid workers and porters who had carried the food items and decoration materials from the marketplace had left complaining and cursing within their hearts. But an old woman was still sitting at the door. She did not fume like the other workers while doing her job. She would swiftly carry out every order she received with a smile. This was Madhavi, who had come in the guise of a laborer to complete her fatal resolve. The guests left, the gathering dispersed, the items of the banquet were cleared away. There was silence all around, but Madhavi was still sitting right there. Suddenly Mr. Bagchi asked, "Buddhi, why are you sitting here? Did you get something to eat?" Madhavi replied, "Yes, Huzur, I did." "Then why don't you leave?" "Where shall I go, Sarkar? I don't have a house. If you allow it, I shall stay here, and with your kindness, I can have an ounce of flour." "Can you work?" "Why not, Sarkar? That is what I want." "Can you babysit my child?" "Yes, Huzur. I would love to do that." "Very well then. You can start from today itself. Go inside and do whatever you are asked." A month passed. Madhavi does her work with such sincerity that the whole house is happy with her. The lady of the house is quite short-tempered. She lies on her bed all day and keeps screaming at the servants about petty issues. But Madhavi gladly tolerates all her growling. The situation was such that no maidservant would stay beyond a week in that house. Madhavi is the only one with such guts that despite enduring the harsh and awful expressions, she never lets a shadow fall on her face. Mr. Bagchi had many sons before, but this one, the youngest, was his only surviving child. Though his children were born healthy, they would soon catch some disease, and consequently either after 2 or 4 months or after a year they would succumb to death. Thus, this child was very precious for both parents. If the boy caught a slight cold, they would get restless. Despite both parents being educated, they would not averse to local remedies such as the practice of magic, prayers, rituals and charms for the boy's survival. The boy was so attached to Madhavi now that he would not let her go for a moment. If she even left for a minute, he would disturb everyone with his incessant cries. He would sleep only if he was to put to bed by Madhavi, would have milk only if fed by Madhavi, would play only if Madhavi played with him. He, in other words, considered Madhavi as his own mother. There was nobody close to him except Madhavi. The boy would see his father only a couple of times in the whole day, and so took him to be a stranger. His mother wasn't in any position to walk around with him because of her lethargy and weakness. He would not allow his mother to take on his responsibility or take appropriate care for his safety. If the servants of the house tried to cuddle him, their callous handling made his tender limbs ache. Some would even toss the little boy high up in the air, frightening him out of his wits. He grew afraid of those servants. Madhavi was the only one who understood him. She knew precisely by what means and under what conditions the boy could be pleased. And that is why the boy loved her. Madhavi used to think that the family was extremely well off. But now she was shocked to see that they could barely meet their monthly expenses. Accounts were taken of every paisa the servants were given to spend, and many a times the necessary items were also voided. One day Madhavi asked the boy's mother, "Why don't you get a fast toy car for the boy? He gets restless being in my lap all the time. Frustrated, Mrs. Bagchi replied, "How do I get that? It will cost no less than 50 to 60 rupees. Where is the money?" "Malkin, you are also talking like this?" "I am not lying. My husband has 5 more daughters from his first wife. They study in a school in Allahabad. The eldest would be no less than 15 or 16 years of age. Half the salary is spent on them. Besides, we are also concerned about their marriages. Their weddings will cost not less than 25,000 rupees. Where will all this money come from? I get extremely worried thinking of all this. It is not any disease, but such worries that make me sick all the time," she said. "But he receives the bribes too." "Buriya, one cannot truly prosper by corrupt means. In fact, frankly speaking, this bribery has made our lives miserable. God knows how others wolf down bribes so easily. Here, whenever such money comes in, there is always a cost that comes along. The loss from such income is too much. I always advise him not to bring in such unlawful earnings. But who listens to me?" It so happened that Madhavi herself was growing fond of the boy. She could not think of doing him any harm. She would sleep and wake up according to the boy's routine. The memory of her own misery at the hands of Mr. Bagchi would make her angry at him for a moment, and her wound would get fresh again. But destructive thoughts did not dictate her conscience. The wound was healing, except that any minor hurt would cause pain. Otherwise, she did not have any feelings of smarting or jealousy. Rather, she began to sympathize with the family. She would speculate about the difficulties that would beset the family unless they grabbed the share of others. How else would they survive? How would they marry off their daughters? The wife is sick all the time. Moreover, the man has to have a bottle of alcohol every day. These people are themselves so unfortunate. A house where 5 marriageable daughters were there, where sons died consecutively, where the mistress remained sick, where the master was an alcoholic. They are already facing God's anger. Though ill-fated, I am faring better, Madhavi thought. Rainy days are an ill omen for children who are weak. They suffer from ailments like cough or fever or diarrhea. How far can one fight for survival in cold weather? Madhavi had gone back to her house one day. The boy had started crying, and so the mother had asked one of the servants to take him out. The servant took him out and sat him on the green grass. The grassy soil was wet with rainwater, and in some places there were small patches of water as well. It was the perfect place to play around for the little boy. All excited, the boy started rolling about in the water. The servant got busy chatting with other men. Hours passed. The boy caught a terrible cold and was brought home with a running nose. When Madhavi returned, she saw that the boy was coughing. Around midnight, she could hear a rattling voice coming out of his throat. Madhavi was terribly shocked. She woke the mother up and said, "Look, what's happening to the child? I'm afraid he has a bad cold." "Yes, it seems like a very bad cold," she said. The mother woke up aghast, and when she heard the boy's rattling voice, she was terribly frightened. She had heard this fearful voice many times before, and thus was familiar with it. Perplexed, she asked, "Light some fire, get some husks of wheat, make a pouch, and give him a hot compress. It will comfort him. I'm sick of all those servants. One of them had taken him out for a while. He must have abandoned the boy in the cold." Both Madhavi and the mistress applied the hot compress all night long. And finally, it was dawn. Hearing about the boy's condition, Mr. Bagchi rushed him to the doctor. Fortunately, the child was attended to in time. The boy recovered in 3 days, but he was so weak that he looked at a terrible sight. Truly speaking, it was Madhavi's dedication that had saved the boy. The mother would fall asleep, and so would the father, but sleep fled Madhavi's eyes. She would hardly remember to eat or drink. She would propitiate the gods with her worship and sacrifice herself completely for the well-being of the child, losing her mind completely. This was the same Madhavi who had once come into this house to avenge her own misery. She had come here for vengeance, but had ended up being an agent of beneficence. She had come here with a poisonous intent, but had ended up offering nectar. The divine in man is so powerful. It was early morning. Mr. Bagchi was sitting by the boy's swing. His wife had a headache. She was lying on the bed, and Madhavi was boiling milk for the child nearby. Mr. Bagchi suddenly said, "Buriya, we will sing your praises as long as we are alive. You have given our child his life." The wife reiterated, "This woman descended in the form of a goddess to free us from our misery," she said. "I wonder what would have happened to us if she wasn't there. Buriya, I have a request to make of you. Though life and death are in the hands of destiny, one's past too has a part to play. I am wretched. It was due to your blessed deeds that the child survived. I am afraid God might yet take the child away from us. To tell you the truth, Buriya, I'm afraid I can't even cuddle the child. From today, consider him your own son. With you, the boy may have a good chance of survival, whereas with us, he will be destined to be a part of our misery. Why don't you mother the child? Take him to your home or wherever you wish. At least the thought that he's been taken care of by you will ease my worries. Truly speaking, it is you who is to be credited as being the mother of this child. I am a hag indeed." Madhavi replied, "Bahuji, God will fix everything. Why do you get so disheartened?" Mr. Bagchi now spoke. No, Budi Mata," he said. "There's no problem in that. I don't believe in such pretensions, yet my heart cannot help but accept them. I myself was sold to a washerwoman by my own mother. I was born after 3 of my brothers had died. Selling me was the only option for my parents to keep me alive. You bring up this child. Treat him as your own son. We will pay for all the expenses. Just don't worry about anything. We'll come and see him once a while whenever we desire. We believe that you will be able to take care of him much better than us. I am a corrupt man. One cannot help being corrupt in the kind of profession that I am in. We are compelled to create false witnesses and send innocents to prison. My weakened conscience cannot escape such temptations. I know very well that evil begets evil, yet I am helpless under these circumstances. If I don't follow this ways, I will be called unfit and thrown out of the system. No one questions the English when they commit countless wrongs, but if an Indian commits a single mistake, all the officers get after his life. Indians should not occupy these bureaucratic positions because whenever they do, they end up becoming morally degraded souls, just to make up for their fault of being an Indian. They have to do a great deal of things that the Englishman can never even think of doing. So what do you say? Will you accept my offer? Madhavi replied at once, Babuji, I will always be ready to offer whatever services I can afford, whenever you wish. I sincerely pray to God for the boy's survival. Madhavi felt as if the doors of heaven has opened before her, and the angels were offering their salutations to her through heavenly gestures. She could feel the rays of light in the deepest corners of her heart. Such was the contentment in the servitude of a mother's love and care. Till now, the boy was sleeping under the sheets. Once the milk was hot, Madhavi lifted the boy from the swing and screamed. The boy's entire body had gone cold, and his face had turned frightfully pale. Shocking one's heart with cold sighs escaping one's throat and tears streaming down one's eyes, Madhavi clutched the child to her chest, though she should have laid the lifeless body down. All hell broke loose. The mother wept with the boy in her arms, never laying him down. What discussions had been going on, and quite the opposite had occurred. Death revels in deceit. It does not come when people are waiting for it. Death strikes when the sick person begins to recover, when he starts partaking normal food, sitting and moving as usual, when the entire house starts celebrating and everybody believes that the worst is over. Right then, the praying death strikes its deadly blow. This is the cruel game that death plays on man. How deft we are in planting orchards of hope. There we sow the seeds of blood and sweat and consume the fruits of ambrosia. We water our saplings with fire and ourselves sit in a cool shade. How ignorant man is. The mourning went on for the whole day. The father cried, the mother was tormented, and Madhavi was consoling both of them by turns. If she could have brought back the child by sacrificing her own life, she would have felt fortunate. She had come here determined to cause mischief, and today, when her wish was fulfilled, she should have ideally felt elated with joy. Instead, she was suffering far more than she had when her own son had been jailed. She had come to make others weep, but now she herself was weeping inconsolably. A mother's heart is a storehouse of kindness. When you burn it, it emits the fragrance of love and kindness, and if you crush it, it will only ooze compassion. A mother is a goddess. Even the cruelest moments of adversity cannot malign this source of spotless purity. That was A Mother's Heart by Munshi Premchand. Please subscribe my channel for more updates, notifications, and for more stories. We'll be back with a new story again. Until then, thank you and good night.